This program could be called the Tesla, Galileo, Newton, Da Vinci, Tchaikovsky, Copernicus factor. For brevity, it is called the Zenith factor. This Zenith factor has been occurring regularly throughout the history of the planet in the persons of greatness, those few individuals who are misunderstood by society, ahead of their time, threatening because of their future views, and often causing jealousy in the ranks of their peers. These great movers of the planet are not acclaimed for their achievements until 100, sometimes 200 years after their death. In their time, they were exiled, excommunicated from the church, stoned in the town square, discredited, ridiculed, and silenced. Why it takes a century or two for society to rediscover these lost treasures and to include them in our text and history books, we may not be able to properly address. But what we can do is present to you the latest example of the Zenith factor. Also forgotten in our time, within this century, the great inventor Nikola Tesla.
He gave the world the alternating current polyphase system. He gave the world fluorescent and neon lights, the radio, robotics, artificial intelligence, the laser beam, helicopters, and dematerialization devices.
When I get an idea, I start at once building it up in my imagination. I change the construction, make improvements, and operate the device in my mind. It is absolutely immaterial to me whether I run the turbine in thought or test it in my shop. There's no difference whatever. The results are the same.
Living at the time before really we had cars, before people really had electric lights, looking at these electric events that Tesla was creating was very dramatic.
We know that he had anticipated the whole broadcast industry, and he finally had to reveal to Morgan and his financiers that what he really was doing with the great tower he was erecting shortly after 1900 on Long Island in New York, he was going to give the entire world free energy. All you would have to do once he had the Earth in resonance would be put up an antenna to proper frequency, and you could extract energy directly, very cheaply.
The transmission station, though, in its total conceptualization, is way beyond something that we have today. He saw global communications in 1901. He was going to construct a radio city. He was going to transmit pictures around the world. He was even going to light up shipping lanes in the Atlantic Ocean by igniting the clouds with this huge magnifying transmitter. He was sending the Earth in resonance. So the three major reasons were jealousy among his peers, the interplanetary communication hypothesis that he stayed with, and the fact that he lost out with Morgan.
And so discredited, silenced, and with the world's greatest secrets still in his mind, longing to complete his grand design, Tesla ended his days in lonely obscurity. He died at the age of 86 in his shabby New York hotel room in 1943. His achievements should have secured a high place in history and in the minds and hearts of a grateful society, but it was not to be. As his moment arrived, is Nikola Tesla the Zenith factor?
The sharp point of difference, it was purely technical, there was nothing personal about it, was that all the fundamental equations of Einstein said that light has a limiting velocity. Nothing could exceed the speed of light, 186,000 miles a second. Tesla, on the other hand, I just might point out that Einstein was a theoretician. He wouldn't know which end of a screwdriver was the useful end to use. I mean, a typical theoretician in that way. Whereas Tesla, on the other hand, was an absolute laboratory man. His hands were made to create something, and he was always doing things, building equipment, experiments, etc., etc. So obviously, how could a man of great integrity like Tesla agree with Einstein when his own data showed that the speed of light can be exceeded?
He was looking at the structure of space-time, the structure of matter, in a completely different way than Einstein was. And I think that this is an important aspect of Tesla, and that is that his whole conception of how the structure of matter is built is in an entirely different dimension than classical physics says today. The fact that he disagreed with Einstein made him seem like a crackpot.
The things that have, number one, that are controversial, are number two, that are heretical. They represent heresy against the established prevailing interpretation. They just don't get any funding at all, and the scientists who persist in that find themselves being ostracized by their peer groups. One of the great mathematicians, I believe it was Gauss, had worked out nonlinear geometry but did not dare publish it for 30 years because he knew immediately it would destroy him and call it heresy. Lobachevsky came along, of course, published nonlinear geometry, and it destroyed him. The man who came up with the original idea, most of the original idea for conservation of energy, Meyer, was hounded out of his position, driven insane. Tesla was a naturalized citizen. He did become an American citizen, of which he was extremely proud. Tesla thought more of his citizenship papers by far than he did of his own patents. He put the patents in the file. He locked his citizenship papers in the safe. He was very proud and extremely proud to be an American. And but when he died, the FBI came in under the Alien Property Act as if he were an alien and not a naturalized citizen, and seized all the property, and that's illegal.
And eventually I met one of them, and I got hold of the papers, and then finally found out what the beam weapon was, and he was the inventor of what's called a particle beam weapon.
He wrote a paper called Increasing Human Energy, which was to increase the effectiveness of human beings, and he felt that this would be key and instrumental in allowing people to come together, communicate, and not feel isolated, not be at war with each other as individual countries, but see their existence on the planet as a whole. And although we saw later when the astronauts went into space and they looked back and they saw the idea that Buckminster Fuller said, spaceship Earth, I think he had a vision like that in his mind, because he really felt that way about it, as seeing the Earth as a whole and the populace as a whole on Earth.
He probably was the first person who invented a satellite communication system with no satellites.
He was all or nothing, and he wanted to be completely into creating the new world. He was a major architect for the new world, and he saw himself as that and undertook that responsibility. And rather than have a relationship with one single individual, he decided to have a relationship with humanity.